Reports over the weekend was announced that Sam Altman, OpenAI CEO, is looking to raise $7 trillion for a new venture for building chips. The big question is why? Well, if you're in a race to develop AGI systems that are smarter than humans and can teach itself, Altman believes you will need vast amounts of chips already in short supply. This race for semiconductor chips, data centers, both real-world and language data, is now in top gear. So what will Elon Musk, Tesla, and xAI do to counter this? Might Elon himself announce his own massive effort to remain the top dog? We've got Jeff Lutz here, and we're going to ask him these questions. He is previously a chief supply chain officer and quality officer at previous Fortune 100s. Welcome, Jeff.
Yeah, great to be with you, Herbert. This is a fun topic.
I like this one, of course, because it's big numbers, just mind-boggling, but these are big thinkers, and the world is changing in front of us. We got to find out why. Let's listen to the announcement first, and then we'll get your thoughts on this.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman now turning to chips, reportedly looking to raise an eye-popping $5 to $7 trillion for a new venture that would boast the world's biggest chip building capacity. That's the focus of today's Tech Check segment with our Deirdre Bosa. What else do we know here, Deirdre?
Let me first just say that everything about this is just mind-boggling and huge in terms of ambition, scale, investment. This is like the moonshot of all moonshots, and here I'm going to use Google's definition. Something that sounds undoable, but if done, could redefine humanity. That is what Sam Altman is apparently working on here, which also means that this should all be taken with some amount of skepticism. A lot would have to fall into place. So let's just start with the number. According to the journal, this could require up to $7 trillion. That is 7 times the expected size of chip sales in 2030, more than 5 years away. It's more than the combined market caps of Apple and Microsoft. It is 7 million millions, and here it is written out, 12 zeros if you are counting. We had to make it big. Now, the project itself is aimed at reshaping the world's chip building capacity. No small feat. Altman is going after one of the most complex, expensive, and geopolitically sensitive industries in the world. And it is a project that would create an equally complex partnership between OpenAI, chip makers, investors, power providers, and governments. Now, the most interesting is perhaps the why. OpenAI and Altman, they're on a quest to develop AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which OpenAI defines as systems that are broadly smarter than humans and therefore have the ability to teach itself, thereby creating new, even potentially smarter AGIs. That will require vast amounts of chips, already in short supply as the generative AI cycle gets more underway. So far, of course, Microsoft has been funding OpenAI's development to the tune of about $13 billion. That is potentially just a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket. $7 trillion would require capital from even bigger sources than the mega caps, like sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, with trillions of dollars in assets. And that raises one of many, many questions, guys. If semiconductors are an issue of national security, which we know they are, would you let Abu Dhabi, Middle Eastern nation states get a foothold? Other questions like the development of chips, something that is clearly very, very difficult to do. Everyone's been trying to create a GPU to rival that of NVIDIA's, and it's been tough going. Can Altman do it, even if he has the support of TSMC and others?
Yeah, so Jeff, you've been following NVIDIA, you've been following semiconductor chips, and then, of course, I'm going to ask you later, what is Tesla's response to this? Are they thinking big enough? Tell me a little bit more about what you just heard here. Why is he doing this?
Yeah, you have to think really broadly about this topic. First off, when people think, $7 trillion to buy chips, well, a chip fab could be anywhere from $10 to $20 billion to build out, and then it has some sort of, has an ongoing run rate. So you're talking, hundreds of chip fabs. So you have to really start like separating some of the thinking here and thinking about the full stack of what's involved here. So obviously you go down to the silicon level. Someone's got to design that silicon. So there's engineering, R&D resources. Then there's the whole, think NVIDIA, for example. Think about NVIDIA on the silicon hardware development side, and then think of their CUDA software platform that runs on top of their AI silicon that they distribute to their customers to do development work on. So you have to start thinking through all these things in the R&D effort, and then think like what's in H100 or H200. It's more, it's these large, complex chip packages with high bandwidth memory, with very complex substrates, with a very complex assembly process. So now you're getting out of just like cranking out wafers of chips to now you're building these small computers. So now you have to keep thinking about the whole stack. And now you go back, you need the hardware development resources, you need software development. It's not only the base silicon, now you have these substrates, you have this high bandwidth memory. All these things need to be fabricated. Then that needs to be assembled and put together. And then, so what is this? Is this for the network infrastructure side? Okay, so now you're talking about the network infrastructure side. And what do those H100s go into? Well, they go into a larger system that needs to be designed and built out. There's hardware and software resources to design that network infrastructure side. So now you're thinking more of the Google, Microsoft, AWS, Amazon type companies that do the network infrastructure side, hardware, software development, and then all the tools. So you're basically swallowing in all these efforts, and that's just the network infrastructure side. Now go to the client side or the subscriber side and think of the inference chip that goes inside of the Tesla vehicle today. Much less complex than what we were talking about before, but that's an AI inference chip running inside of those vehicles. Now think of that inference chip. Now it's out of the vehicle. Now it's put into the chest of the bot. And think of all the development resources, training, hardware, software, everything that goes in that. Now think of the end products that go on the subscriber side. May they be bots, may they be other types of AI devices that help you throughout your day, basically connecting everything in your household, everything that you interact with would have some sort of connectivity to AI. And how would that system be designed? And you've heard about partnerships, but potential discussed partnerships of Sam Altman and Johnny Ive, who did a lot of, tremendous hardware design, industrial design for Apple for many decades. And now you're thinking about the things that people touch and hold. So you have the network infrastructure side, the things that people touch and hold and use every day. You think about the base, the core layer, the silicon, the software, the hardware, and all of a sudden this starts to add up. You think of an NVIDIA, it's a 1.6 or $8 trillion company. You think of where Amazon is, where Microsoft is, and then these numbers start becoming a little bit more understandable. But I would, for my money, this would be a very big undertaking. I'm not saying Sam's not capable, and he's got a prior history of running Y Combinator and just that whole mentality of getting these companies starting from basically zero to exiting. And but I would feel much better if you look at kind of the capital allocation approach that Elon and Tesla have done. I would feel much better about a very large sum of investment going into in there and what the output could be. But we can talk a little bit more about that. But that's how I'm thinking about this. You have to really deconstruct the 7 trillion. And by the way, it's a very large number. It could be 5. It could be, who knows what they're going to ultimately be able to raise. Oh, one more thing. The other thing you have to think about, all those efforts I just described from the network infrastructure side to the client side, now localize those supply chains and localize those efforts to multiple continents, because that's what ultimately these leaders of nations are going to want. They're not going to want to have to come to the US for everything, or to Taiwan for everything, or to China, or to, they're going to want their own efforts localized, in their own continent. So think South America, think the European Union, think rest of Asia, think China. And now you really start to get an understanding of the gravity of this.
Okay. Yeah. So this race to AGI, right? You've explained that very well, all the areas that need to be in. That's why you need this much money. And so I do want to understand where Tesla is. I'm going to play a clip here from CNBC, continue to talk about this, and they name all the different companies that what they're doing. Tesla's not even on this list yet. So let's watch this, and then we'll get you back on.
It's also a Reuters report that OpenAI and NVIDIA are working on custom chips, hence the positive reaction in NVIDIA shares. Creating custom chips isn't new for NVIDIA, though. I want to point that out. And something CEO Jensen Huang did mention in his keynote back in 2002, which I listened to, but it was largely overlooked, myself included, because we were all just more focused on NVIDIA's AI chips, right? It's all about those GPUs. But today, Reuters reporting NVIDIA is actually meeting with Amazon, Meta, Google, and OpenAI to discuss building their own custom chips. And they're also in talks, NVIDIA's in talks to work with on a wireless chip with Ericsson. So I reached out to NVIDIA. They wouldn't confirm any of these conversations, but it's still enough to create a reaction in all of these stocks. A lot of these companies like Ericsson, or negatively impact a company like Marvell, because Marvell does make custom chips. So does Broadcom. And for those that are like, all this conversation about chip stuff, custom chips, think of it like performing very specific tasks. Therefore, they're a lot cheaper than GPUs, which GPUs can handle a wide range of tasks like graphics, rendering, machine learning, etc. And to bring it full circle to your conversation requires a lot more power. In the chip world, they use the word power gate, right? And this is going to be a huge topic in the years to come because of the power use that is needed for these data centers, which is why efficiency is key for budgets for everyone.
One more company we're not mentioning, Microsoft. Its destiny is uniquely tied to what OpenAI is doing. A lot of the technology they are developing, or OpenAI is developing, will eventually find its way to Microsoft products. They're already doing that with their Copilot assistant and so forth. The journal reporting that, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, is aware that Sam Altman is going out here trying to do that. But look, what we learned last fall was this is a complicated relationship, not just because Microsoft relies so much on the technology, but because it's heavily invested in OpenAI too. Mm-hmm. So if OpenAI is chasing, a $7 trillion fundraise at, again, as Deirdre said, who knows what the valuation of a company would be there. That plays into Microsoft, and that plays into Microsoft's
has a lot
valuation.
of money, but they don't have $7 trillion.
Exactly, and so that also plays into how Microsoft values its stake in OpenAI. Not to mention just the technology being developed. Microsoft also working on its own chips, so there are just a lot of complicating factors.
What's the argument, Deirdre? Christina or Steve or Deirdre, for that matter, that a non-incumbent chip maker, not NVIDIA, not Intel, not Broadcom, not ARM, not AMD, could be a big beneficiary of this?
Well, in the case with OpenAI, he has the branding right now and the interest from, sovereign wealth funds all around the world that want to invest in AI. So there is an opportunity for investments there. But the big question is, I think the skepticism is around actually OpenAI building the chips, why he has to rely on third-party members. A beneficiary would be TSMC, Taiwan Semi, for example. But we saw with the example of Apple. Apple has been working on these mobile chips for smartphones for quite some time. But they had to re-sign their agreement with Qualcomm because they weren't able to make a chip that was ready to put in the new iPhones. And that shows that even Apple, a tech company that's been around forever, mega cap, has been a leader in technology, still can't figure out exactly how to get those chips for the perfect chip for the phone. And it shows that a lot of these chip companies will benefit because they specialize. And that's what AMD does. That's what Marvell does, Broadcom, Arista Networks. The list continues.
All right, Christina, thanks very much. Deirdre, you too. And Steve, thanks for being with us.
Wow. Okay. So when he said one company we haven't mentioned, I thought he was going to say Tesla. He talked about Microsoft. Tesla, of course, has their own custom chip, Dojo. But you can see the movement. You can see the rush to hear even Apple can't get enough chips. They're all trying to fund it. And that's hence the $7 trillion. Is Elon thinking big enough? Maybe talk about the clip first, and then we'll get to that topic next.
Yeah, the clip went in a number of different directions. In terms of there's this conversation, does the GPU kind of swallow, the former CPU, and how's that whole thing going to play out? I actually bought silicon. We actually experimented with using NVIDIA back in 2011 in a phone, and we launched that program. We partnered with Jensen and the team on that. And that was their foray into the subscriber side of mobile. The chip that was referenced in the video was them having a reported conversation with Ericsson, who's one of the biggest network infrastructure suppliers in the world, and working on the network infrastructure side, the silicon side for network infrastructure for mobile, for cellular, for mobile, and all the advanced data networks that are wireless. So, but that foray in 2011 didn't work out as well for NVIDIA or for us at the time, and ultimately the cost structure didn't work. They didn't have enough scale. They didn't have enough partners signed up for their solution versus the Qualcomm solution. And there's a company, another company that was doing a budget silicon called MediaTek at the time. Anyway, they didn't break in; it didn't work out. But obviously, they obviously pivoted more to the GPU side and the gaming and started there and were very successful doing there. But there was a time back, even call it 13 years ago or so, where there was are we going to pivot, and is NVIDIA going to really take a bunch of this market share on the RF wireless side? But kind of bringing up leveling this whole conversation. What I see Sam Altman doing is he's looking across all these companies. They're all doing different things. There's people doing work. There's Apple doing work on the consumer side. There's Microsoft doing both the consumer and the network infrastructure side. There's Meta trying to break into the consumer side with VR. And what he's trying to do is he's looking at the size of these companies. He's looking at the size of the R&D efforts. And he's looking at capacity and saying, we're going to be bottlenecked in a number of different areas. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to figure out is can a bigger effort be kicked off to accelerate these efforts so that we can meet the needs of AGI? And it's an interesting concept, because not one of these companies alone is going to be able to probably get all the capital that they need. So why not start something completely fresh and have it funded, from the outside? Like I said, who knows what the valuation of that effort would be? But when I look at, the best, allocators in human history right now, I mean, it has to be, Tesla. It has to be in that conversation, and Elon Musk. So, but I think all of this kind of plays together. There's kind of a little bit of a soap opera playing out here too, of why was Altman fired from OpenAI by the board? What ultimately happened there? We still don't know. Elon's behavior right now, is that going to garner tremendous interest and investment in capital from the outside? Elon can raise capital like I think nobody else in this world. But could some of those efforts be hampered by his relationships with other CEOs and some of the issues going on in public today? I don't know, but I think he would be an amazing capital. The ability to raise capital would be tremendous. But are they thinking big enough? Probably not. But I think he's thinking about the bottlenecks. That's the thing. I think Elon's thinking about the bottlenecks. I think Sam Altman is thinking about the bottlenecks. But in terms of like realizing hardware and building an industry from zero to like where you see EV today, think about EV today. Think about the battery supply chain. Think about the charging supply chain. Think about the whole EV supply chain. Think about all the vehicles on the road, the millions of vehicles now on the road today. And that whole industry was built up, fundamentally by Elon and pushing everyone else along the way. So who would I trust with building up that next set of hardware and doing it in a most efficient manner, hardware, software, that complete ecosystem of solutions? I would feel better. For me as an investor, I would feel better if I were putting dollars towards this $7 trillion effort. I would wanted to put it behind, if Elon was in charge of it versus anyone else. But when you think about the size of XAI and you think about the 29 billion that Tesla has, these numbers all of a sudden start to sound very small in terms of what's needed. So is the 7 trillion realistic? What's the time frame to raise that kind of capital? And then again, you have to think about geographically and how would you split that and create these efforts globally. So this is really thinking on a grand scale. I'm glad that the thought process is even being kind of kicked off, because to me, you need thinking this large, but there needs to be a tremendous amount of detail, I believe, below it. And so there's a really effective use, because you think of $7 trillion, that's basically a decade of our military spend in the US. And you can always question like the efficacy and efficiency of government spend, and now put this in the private sector and in like how efficiently would this be spent. So I would feel much better about that under Elon versus anyone else, just based on his track record.
So, okay, that's a few things. Let's talk about it, right? So, first of all, this is a moment in time. We're watching this happening. You can see people like Sam Altman realizing, everybody, Microsoft, everybody realizing that this AGI is a race and that it's big enough. It's big enough that they feel that they need to raise $7 trillion. Okay, you have to ask why that much money. And few people are actually questioning whether or not AI is big enough, to continue this. I mean, there are people wondering if this is a hype cycle or this is real. Second thing is what you said it really eased my mind a bit, because you're right. Elon is very, very smart. He knows this. He's been thinking about this before Sam Altman he founded OpenAI. He was the one who created Dojo years before the chip shortage was happening, realizing that they need to do this. He's the one now sounding the alarm, like you were saying, the bottlenecks. So who's going to build the data centers? But then who's going to power the data centers? Where's the energy come from? You've heard Elon talk about this already, right? You're going to be able to see the data centers. They're going to be so large. You're going to see them from the sky, from the space. You can see them because they're going to be lit up like crazy. But who's going to be powering that energy is what he's thinking about now. And he knows the bottlenecks that will get there. So I think that maybe where I'm going at this is now thinking, okay, Dojo, they've been working on it. He probably needs to see it hit a certain milestone. And then if it does hit that, that's when he's going to then raise the money, and he can easily, right? Like you said, he's probably got an easier chance of raising the money, even more than Sam Altman and Microsoft, even though they're already probably going to be able to raise this. They have to go to sovereign funds in Saudi Arabia. Elon has those relationships anyways. For all we know, that's why he's been hobnobbling with them already, because he's already setting the stage up. But
yeah, AI chips are the next oil. Where else are they going to put
bigger than oil
their money behind? Much bigger.
Yeah. So I feel good that Tesla, like you said, the way you described it, it's not just the money. You need to have the fabs. You need to have the energy, the data centers,
R&D
all
resources.
So, R&D, yeah. So Tesla's well set up for it. So I'm, and it's not like just because Sam Altman announced this now doesn't mean that we're behind. Tesla's behind, but it's just my concern, and I've been saying this for a while now, is Tesla is a robotics AI company. He's been repeating that, which is great, but we're not seeing it in the investments yet. $2 billion is not enough. People are going, yeah, but their R&D is so much more efficient. Okay, but we also know that 90% of us is just pure cash. Buy the chips, buy the data centers. It's compute constrained, not engineer constrained. They've already said that. That's cash, compute. So, I'm hoping and expecting Tesla to make a massive announcement. But if they don't, and the longer it waits, I get a little concerned. That's what
Herbert. There's one key thing there, and that is, what is your consumption rate of that capital? And these things happen at certain rates at certain points of time. So
right.
Like this bot team, starting this bot team at Tesla, this was a skunkworks small thing,
right.
And now they've built it out, and now there's hundreds of people. But you wouldn't need to throw $1 trillion of that at day one, because it would just be sitting there doing nothing. Same thing on the network, on the silicon side for network infrastructure, H100s, H200s. There wasn't a capacity built out in the world relative to the demand that's out there. So you could have thrown a bunch of money at it. There's money available to build out that capacity. They just need time to build out that capacity. So there's a rate of consumption. I think that's a key portion of this. But I think what both Elon and Sam Altman are pointing out is that when some of these bottlenecks are clear, that rate of consumption could grow pretty dramatically and pretty quickly. Then it moves to the next bottleneck, whether it's power, whether it's something else. And that's when there would need to be funding available. So yeah, it's January or February 2024, and you hear the big $7 trillion number. What's Tesla doing? And I agree with you that he's got to be looking at these milestones around Dojo, around the bot, and around what they're doing at XAI, and figure out from a maturity perspective, where are these things at, and where do they need to be to really need an influx of additional, much higher additional capital. So I still like Tesla's position in terms, especially in the humanoid world, of they build automobiles, they build smaller devices like Starlinks, which they're ramping up into the millions. and they have this ability. Now they're going to have to build this mid-sized device. That's going to be a much more difficult device for the smaller microelectronics companies to build. And it's going to be a much more difficult device for the larger auto companies to scale down to and build. So I really like where Tesla's positioned. I like the fact that they launched that effort on their on the inference chip back, I think 2016, very early on. They launched it. I said, look, this is going to be a bottleneck. I'm going to put a development team on it, and we're going to own it. And sure enough, not only was it a supply bottleneck, but it's a COGS bottleneck as well. Because if they were to buy that inference chip for those 5.5 million vehicles, they would be paying NVIDIA 60 or 70% gross margin. So you have to think of bottlenecks both in supply and availability as well as cost structure. And I think Elon is thinking about these things the right way. The question is going to be about the consumption rate and when is this stuff going to be ready.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, if you started the bot and you had $7 trillion, it doesn't matter. You still need 2, 3, 4 years before you can actually use that money. So that part is exactly true. So yeah, it's just, right? This is the biggest impact, consequential thing that's happening to the world, humanity. And then we're right in it, which is exciting and fun. And then you're watching the other players and they're all, it's worthy contenders. And again, it's probably big enough that it doesn't matter what these guys are doing. It's just interesting to follow along.
Yeah. And one other thing, don't underestimate the political interference that's going to be involved with AI. And each of these continents and major countries are going to want their own localized supply chain and their own localized effort to not put a bunch of restrictions, laws against the proliferation use of AI. So if you're a big capital allocator like an Elon or Sam Altman, they're both globetrotting right now. They're talking to world leaders all over the world. That's one of the things that comes out. And that's one of the reasons why you would need a significant investment is you would need to localize a lot of these supply chains all the way from the network infrastructure, the silicon network infrastructure side, all the way down to the client side and the silicon side and the client, and then the fabrication of those devices. Because if we were to go be at some sort of global war, whoever wins that war is going to be the continent and the country that has all of that end-to-end capability. So everybody's going to want a piece of this. Otherwise, they're going to over-regulate it to the point where it's not useful. And so just think about the geopolitical aspects of this as well. I think it lends credence to why some of these numbers may be as big as they are.
Makes sense. Okay, that was we got to keep following this closely. Thank you so much, Jeff. You can follow him on X at the Jeff Lutz. Thanks, everybody. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.